This is Michele Jaco, host of the Inside the Chapters podcast for the novel When I See the Wolf Ride. And here's a recap of what happened in Chapter 15 of Book 1. In this chapter, as Lee and the others finish their training, Captain Avigdor announces he is marrying Ipo. That leads to a conversation about God and family. Roy looks at Carol, who reminds him of his beloved wife who recently passed. The captain shares his faith, which has been strengthened by Tex. Carol shares her anger with God at the death of her mother. And Art declares he no longer believes there is a God, just needy people who made him up. To lighten the mood, Lee challenges Carol to a shooting match. After they leave the others, Carol asks him if he is thinking about courting her. It had occurred to Lee, but in his heart, he still wasn't over Elizabeth. Then this happened.
On the following Monday, I was wondering what my job would be like now that we had our training behind us. Captain Avigdor, Tex, and Roy were waiting for me at the door when I arrived.
You got a minute?
It wasn't a question. Once the four of us were inside a secure room, all three men sat down, facing me. Everybody was wearing Tex's famous frown. What had I done now? The captain looked grim, glancing at the others before he spoke.
Coit, we're thinking about firing you.
Welcome to the audio production of the novel When I See the Wolf Ride, Book 1, Chapter 16. Copyright 2024 by Jeffrey Lee Neal. Read by the author with Michele Jaco reading the part of Elizabeth. And now, here is Chapter 16 of When I See the Wolf Ride, Book 1.
Chapter 16, Breakfast for Dinner. From the Bible, your young men will see visions, and your old men will dream dreams. Acts 2, verse 17.
We're thinking about firing you.
I searched their faces for some sign that this was a joke. Nothing but frowns. Jesus Christ! Tex became angry.
Are you sure you want blasphemy to be your first response?
I'm sorry, but what did I do to deserve this? Roy took over.
We haven't decided that yet.
What?
Son, we got something big coming up. We need you. Rangers can't do this.
I must have looked very confused.
We didn't start this conversation off right, but we wanted to make sure your expression would be correct for what we're going to ask you to do.
My expression? Now, Captain Avigdor took over.
Tex and Roy needed to see that you want to keep this job and that you'd be really outraged if you lost it.
Roy smiled.
Don't worry. You looked mad enough to swap bites with a rattlesnake.
That didn't help. What's this about? The captain sighed.
Before we tell you, we need to know that at least for now, nothing we say is shared with anybody outside this room. Not other Rangers, not even the team.
You don't trust them? Roy smiled.
Of course we trust them. It's other people that might be watching and listening that we don't trust.
The captain looked worried. Not a good sign.
Coit, there's a drug cartel that's been supplying all of North America. They're bringing in pot, coke, morphine, heroin, and some other drugs that are so new, there ain't no laws against them yet.
Okay, Cap, we've been after drug dealers before.
This is bigger. We believe there's a plan to flood this nation with new drugs, not only introduced into the youth and college population, but into key military bases. Every military installation in the United States has a number of civilians on site that work on everything from electrical power lines to food delivery. We have intel that the Colombian nationals are coming to America for something they're calling an event.
Okay, assume I'm stupid, but none of this was making sense. He could tell.
Perrin Air Force Base in Sherman, which is a few miles north of your hometown of Van Alstyne, closed at the end of June last year. There ain't much security at Perrin anymore. An old pest control guy, Clayton McDonald, was crawling under one of the barracks there spraying pesticide. He found a shipping tag that had slipped through a crack in the floor. It was for Colombian coffee. 8 tons of it. He showed me an old, dirty cardboard tag. It read, 421 PAFB, H2 USA, 8 toneladas de café, 8211972, 33.717201, -96.677113, Evento. Look on the back, Coit.
Hand scribbled on the back of the tag was this signature, Lee Dunham. Tex grabbed the tag and frowned at me.
Ed read us in on your secret background. Your real name was Lee Dunham.
Tex handed the tag to Roy, who had his own tiger stare for me.
So, how did your former name get signed on a tag for 8 tons of Colombian coffee delivered to a military base that just closed?
Sir, that's not my signature. The captain smiled.
We know. We compared it with your signature and they're not even close. But after all the covert work we did to make that name go away, it's alarming to see it show up after you've supposedly been dead for months.
There was an audible sigh of relief from me.
The old man who found it figured H2 PAFB meant Hangar 2 at Perrin, and 421 was probably the number on the case. So he thought he'd go to the hangar and put it back with its container. He was curious to see if there really was 8 tons of coffee in that hangar. Then he noticed 4 armed guards around it in military fatigues. He's ex-military. Since this was highly unusual, he called the sheriff.
Who were those guys?
Good question. The local sheriff took his deputies to Hangar 2 to investigate. On their way, they saw a small plane leaving on the old runway. There were no guards, but there was a 2-ton case in the hangar.
Coffee?
There was coffee in the case, but under the coffee was drugs, and under the drugs were weapons and explosives.
How could they leave that much stuff?
Evidently, they found out the sheriff was coming, didn't have much time, and didn't want to get caught. So they fled.
Tex picked up the tag.
Here's the worst of it. This tag said there was 8 tons. We only found 2.
In our small, fluorescent illuminated room, with aluminum chairs and a map of Texas, the Sherman-Denison area really didn't stand out until Roy circled it with a red magic marker.
Something big's about to go down here, and if Rangers, FBI, or any other agents show up, we may scare 'em off. We've had the local sheriff officially report to the military that they left a large crate of coffee at Perrin. The military said they'll send a truck to come pick it up.
So, what does all this have to do with me? Captain Avigdor stood and looked at the others. It was clear they wanted him to drop this bomb.
You grew up there. You've been going back every weekend. The problem is, if we send you there, whoever's behind all this may get suspicious you're on an investigation.
My heart sank. I'm not sure I like where this is going.
So we thought about it, and we decided the best cover would be to fire you. Then it would be natural for you to go back up there and stay a while with Wolf's parents.
I don't like involving them. And what do I do about DJ? The captain smiled.
DJ can stay with Epo, Crystal, and me. We don't think it'll be that long. Remember what was on the tag? We believe that number, 8211972, is August 21st, 5 days from now. We believe the other numbers are latitude and longitude.
They're Sherman? Tex grimaced.
Very near, Sherman. Son, it's all going to happen in your own backyard in 5 days.
There's one more thing.
Captain Avigdor and his worried face came closer to me.
We think Clayton McDonald's boss may be involved. The boss told him to forget about it and not to mention it again. McDonald knew better than that when he went to the sheriff, but he never let on to his boss. He doesn't trust the guy. He was going to quit, but we asked him to handle it a little differently.
How's that? Roy grinned.
We think you may have a future killing bugs. He's going to tell his boss he'd like to retire, and he's going to recommend his boss hire you as a temporary replacement.
I don't know anything about pest control, but wait a minute. The captain sighed.
That's right. His name is Dick Arnold. Arnold's Pest Control. He's the one seeing your friend, Elizabeth.
All I could see in my mind was her face if she found out. I can't do this. She already avoids me. She'll hate me if I go to work for him. She'll think it's about her. And what if someone from Van Alstyne recognizes me? Have you thought about that? I went to high school there. I'm supposed to be dead, killed in action. We went to great lengths to sell that story.
Yes, we did.
Captain Avigdor paused to look at the other guys. They wanted him to continue to sell it.
But now, somebody's using your name. There's about to be some kind of domestic attack on our military and God knows what else. It all appears to be happening in Sherman. We got 5 days. And your real name is our best lead. The security of this nation is more important than your relationships, your friends, or even your life. I don't care if someone from your old hometown recognizes you. It might actually be good to stir things up.
I looked at the floor, as if there was some mysterious answer hidden in the dirty tiles. I knew I had no choice. We all knew I was going to do it. Okay. What now? Captain Avigdor gestured to a fold-up table in the corner.
When we tell you, kick that table over and stomp out of here as mad as you can look. Go home, pack your things, and drive to Sherman. At 3:15 p.m., go to City Lights, you know, that hamburger joint, and meet Clayton McDonald. He'll introduce you to Dick Arnold.
Now, Tex looked worried. Bad sign.
You're going to be on your own for 5 days, son. The other guys on the team are going to be really furious you got fired, and we want them that way.
I knew, in case someone's watching us here. Roy nodded.
Yep, they're probably going to come in here and fight for you to get your job back. We'll read them in eventually, but for right now, we'll be the only ones who know. It's a lot to hit you with, but...
But there's no other choice. I have this thing for getting in the middle of dangerous situations. The captain grinned.
You do have that.
Then his worried look returned.
I promise you, I'll make sure DJ is all right.
In case I don't come back? I appreciate that, sir. Roy glanced at Tex and grinned.
I ain't got no doubts. You're going to be back like a bad odor in an outhouse. Now kick this table over and stomp out of here.
I kicked to the table as hard as I could, yelled for them all to go to hell, and stomped out. The plain, white-walled, gray-carpeted hallway was barely large enough to allow me to get past Hershey without pushing him aside.
Hey man, what happened?
I never stopped. Instead, I yelled back as I hit the door. Ask them! They fired me! The courtyard outside DJ's school had beautiful red roses peeking out from the circular garden spot. His sad face contrasted with the happy kids playing in the distance.
You always leave me.
I brought my face closer to his. But I always come back, and I always will. I hoped I wasn't lying. Toward the end of summer, Captain Avigdor had arranged for me to visit a car auction. My new ride belonged to a drug dealer who died in his car. I couldn't get the bloodstains out, but the price was right. After some wrangling with insurance companies, because I was male and under 25, I could legally drive it. It had this beautiful bronze finish, black bucket seats, 4-speed, 383 engine, a 1969 Dodge Dart, convertible. Even with this wonderful new ride, the trip to Durant made me cringe. I didn't want to lie to Degataga and Awadasa. I never had, but this time was different. Degataga sat on the porch of the small, partially rock, partially wood farmhouse, quietly whittling, creating a small pile of wood shavings at his feet. He looked up and smiled as I approached.
Unusual for you to be here midweek. You get fired or something?
Don't ask me, and I won't have to tell you. Can I stay here a few days?
Bed's already made. Awanasa's at.
The grocery store?
Figured you'd be hungry.
That spiritual vision you have. You knew?
God gives me a little nugget here and there.
You knew I was fired?
Is that what happened?
That's what I'm telling you happened. He grinned.
Good enough for me.
He stopped, his face searching mine. He took the little switchblade he was using, folded it, and put it in my hand.
This knife has a couple of little bitty stickers on it. See?
The knife's casing did have 2 sharp points that stuck out of it.
A man can take a knife like that and stick it inside his belt. Sticks there all day, no matter what you're doing. Easy to get to quickly if you ever need it.
I hid the little knife inside my belt. You always seem to know a lot more about my life than I do.
When a storm's come in, it's wise to dress for it.
A storm? He became serious.
Leahy, you are not here by accident. Don't you realize you were chosen? God picked you out as His from the very start. Think of it, you were included in God's original plan of salvation by the bond of faith in the living truth.
What?
Leahy, you're about to see things you can't see.
Things I can't see? He smiled.
Things you can't see yet.
I really wished I had even a tiny portion of his spiritual vision. I needed to change the subject. I guess you know I've got to get going now, too. Any advice? He stared out at the fields to the east.
I'm not clairvoyant, but I do know that the key to everything for you in the next few days is Lee Dunham. Whatever questions there are, whatever problems come up, whatever you have to do, it's all about Lee Dunham.
I nodded like I understood that and left. Lee Dunham may have been the answer, but I wasn't sure I even knew the question. The City Lights diner between Sherman and Denison looked more like a dining hall for horses than people. Even the old scratched-up Arnold's Pest Control pickup truck parked outside was newer than the faded wooden walls of this place. Opening the door, I was greeted with the aroma of burned meat mixed with the stench of cigarette smoke. It gave the neon Lone Star beer sign and the dusty incandescent lights in this dark wooden cave-like dive sort of a glow. At 3:15 in the afternoon, it was empty, except for an old weathered figure sitting near the restrooms. This had to be Clayton McDonald. Overweight, with his body spilling out of the wooden chair at the dirty table like clothed jello, he wore an undersized white shirt and tan khakis, along with a stained branded cap from Arnold's Pest Control that barely covered his stringy white hair. His tired eyes shot a glance my way to look me over.
You Coit?
It was a gruff old voice that reminded me of my favorite captain. Yes, sir.
Sit. You want a burger? I can guarantee you won't want one after we go to Arnold's.
Why is that?
'Cause the whole stinking building smells of pesticide. I'm used to it, but if you ain't, best eat something before you go.
I'll be okay. Smelled quite a lot of nasty things in Nam.
Sit down anyway.
The dark wooden tables and chairs looked homemade. I almost slid out of the seat. Even the chairs here were greasy.
Glad they said a vet. I'm a vet. Arnold's not. The other 2 guys that work for him are foreign, Mexicans or Colombians or something. They don't speak good English. I guess your boss told you about what I found.
Yes, sir. What do you suspect?
I suspect Arnold's a dung beetle with a degree. Whatever's going on, he's part of it. Do you know anything at all about pest control?
No, sir.
Then the best thing you can do when you meet him is listen to him talk.
He stopped to spit on the floor. Probably the best cleaning it had in months. Then he looked back at me and frowned.
He likes to talk.
I followed the Arnold pickup to an old house next to the railroad tracks in a rundown part of Sherman. The name Arnold's Pest Control in large 3D letters stood on the roof, propped up by shiny metal poles. The old, damaged roof didn't look as if it could support them. Inside, the residue of pesticide permeated the air. Weathered wallpaper was peeling from the walls. There were metal tables with pest control equipment, a city map tacked on one wall, and some fold-up chairs. An older, pudgy lady, who looked to be about 60, sat at a metal desk in the corner as the receptionist. She had a flowered blouse, bright red hair, and very large, thick black glasses.
This is Mary.
Hi, Clayton. Who's the kid?
Meet Coit. He'll be replacing me.
I smiled. Her eyes examined me with what would have been an expression of disgust had it not been colored with so much indifference.
Uh-huh.
The back of the house had been redone with the rich bubinga wood on the walls. A couple of large leather chairs stood guard on either side of the elegant door to what had one time been the master bedroom, now marked private. Clayton knocked lightly.
Come.
This elegant office smelled of incense, sporting a luxurious ocean blue shag carpet, a huge leather sofa, and large oil paintings of scantily clad Latin women adorning the walls. Dick Arnold reclined in his oversized leather chair behind his imposing desk, properly positioned under the large oil painting of himself. Arnold looked to be about 30 years old, trim with unusually blonde hair and a pencil-thin mustache. He was wearing a yellow monogrammed shirt bearing his name in bright red letters similar to those on his roof. He sat there smiling, buried in a trade magazine, acting as if he barely noticed us. I suspected there might be a copy of Playboy inside the cover of the trade magazine, because I was convinced his little act was for our benefit. This dung beetle was marking his territory.
Mr. Arnold, this is Coet Neal, the man I told you about.
Arnold stood up, glanced at me, and then walked over to a small aquarium with some sand and rocks. He gestured for me to come, like a king granting an audience.
You probably don't know this. This is Synthroids vitatus.
I looked at the arachnid crawling around in the sand, and then at Clayton. Clayton frowned.
Mr. Arnold, he knows it's a bark scorpion.
Arnold glared at me the way Bosner had in Vietnam.
I am an expert. I have a master's degree in entomology. I can identify 1,000 different pest species. I'm building the largest pest control company in North Texas. I'm going to run every other one of these little foraging competitors out of business. They're a bunch of losers who have the choice of either becoming garbage men or crawling under houses. None of them know what I know. So tell me, why the hell should I even consider employing somebody like you?
The image in my mind of my fist meeting this jerk's nose was interrupted by Clayton's deep voice.
He's a hard worker, just lost his job in law enforcement in Dallas. You don't get those jobs if you're stupid or lazy.
Arnold didn't reply. Instead, he stared at Clayton and then at me. Clayton, feeling the awkward silence, repeated himself.
And he's a hard worker.
Arnold went back to his desk, sat down, picked up a piece of paper, and examined it.
If you're so great, why the hell did they fire you?
Clayton started, but if I was going to get this job, I had to bust in. I was betrayed. I earned my position there. I worked my rear off for those people. I even put myself in harm's way. I got fired so the captain over me could hire his idiot nephew. I need a job and I'll work hard for you. I'll do the dirty stuff that no one else wants to do. I'll listen and I'll learn fast. You look like a man that wants things done a certain way. I can take orders and I'll do things exactly the way you want them done. He put the paper down, glaring at us.
Okay, we'll see if you will. You're hired. Old Mac here will train you. I'll give you a couple of weeks. Impress me and you'll stay. Disappoint me, and I'll make sure you don't work here or any place else in town. I know a lot of important people.
He picked up his magazine and started to read, the signal we were dismissed. Clayton closed the door, muttering under his breath.
Dung beetle with a degree.
If an airport could be a ghost town, Perrin Air Force Base had succeeded. Large empty hangars bordered larger concrete runways, surrounded by abandoned barracks and offices. Had everything been in black and white, it would have looked like a set from the Twilight Zone.
I told the dung beetle I still had some structures to treat out here, which is true. That gives you a couple of hours. This is where I found the tag. Hangar 2 is clearly marked near the runway. Be careful. It doesn't appear anybody's watching us, but you never know. We've only got a couple of weeks for you to find out what's going on, then Dung Beetle may fire you.
The old man didn't realize we had less than 5 days. The equipment storage building where he had found the tag was completely empty. There were large cracks in the old wooden floor, so it would have been possible for a tag to fall through a crack. Still, this didn't make sense. The room wasn't big enough for a couple of tons of anything. Hangar 2 was huge and locked. During my time in the hospital, Art's get-well gift for me was a lesson in picking locks. This door was easy pickings. Inside it was bare, save for the presence of a large open crate. The weapons and drugs had been removed, leaving packing materials strung about, along with some coffee bags on the floor. I wondered if the coffee had been put in the crate to hide the other contents. I picked up a 1-pound bag. Nothing special. It had the word cafe printed on it, with some numbers in very fine print that I couldn't read. I carried the bag with me as I continued to investigate. I counted over 70 bags of coffee strung around the open crate. The crate had no markings. The tag Clayton found was probably all that identified it. So why did that tag end up under a structure so far away? Roy told me they were not able to get any fingerprints off the tag except for Clayton's. I couldn't find anything else suspicious. I relocked the door, but took the coffee bag with me. On the way back, Clayton noticed my new bag of coffee.
I'm no lawman, but ain't that evidence?
They'd already pulled out all the stuff they cared about. Besides, I've always wanted to try Colombian coffee, see if it's as good as Juan Valdez claims it is. As we drove up to Arnold's, it was about 7 p.m. There was a red Corvette parked next to my car in front of Arnold's pest control office. Arnold got out on the driver's side, looking into the car, smiling.
I'll only be a minute, babe.
Clayton handed me his business card.
My address is on the back. Come by my house at 6 tomorrow morning. I'll fix some breakfast before work, and we can try out some of that coffee.
I nodded. The passenger in the Corvette had already seen me. Elizabeth, wearing the same blue dress she wore when I first met her, stared. Was that shock or outrage on her face? I smiled, did an awkward wave, and drove away as quickly as possible. Degataga and Awanasa held dinner for me. Their beer can chicken was worth the wait. We all had things we wanted to say, but no one spoke. It was clear all of us were in another place, consumed with thoughts of my real reason to be here and how it might affect Elizabeth. After we put up the dishes, we sat in their living room. Awanasa could hold back no longer.
Leahy, I am so worried.
Please don't. Please don't worry. I don't have a lot of choices. I care about the two of you and DJ more than I can put into words. I can promise you, whatever happens, this won't last long. I'm here now to... I was interrupted by knocking on their door. Elizabeth.
I need to speak to Leahy, alone.
Dusk was ending. The sky was dull red, with a few clouds hiding a full moon above us. Elizabeth was livid. The red glimmers on her face reflected her mood.
Did you come here to spy on me? Are you so jealous, paranoid, or insane that you actually went to work for Dick?
Elizabeth.
You did. You went to work for the man I'm dating. You couldn't leave it alone. Are you thinking you're going to hurt him, make him go away so I'll fall in love with you?
I got fired in Dallas.
So rather than getting work in Dallas, you come here? To this little town? You just happened to go to work for Dick? I thought you were a good man, Leahy. Actually, a great man. I thought you were like Wea. I could have fallen in love with you.
She stopped, breathless.
But now, you scare me.
She turned and ran to her car. I called after her, but she clearly had said what she came to say, with no appetite for any further conversation. I walked back into the kitchen. Degataga and Awanasa weren't looking at their food. They heard it all. I spoke before they could. I'm kind of worn out. I'd like to go to bed now. I have to leave early, having breakfast with Mr. McDonald before work. Awanasa started to speak, but Degataga stopped her with one word.
Good night.
We all knew it wasn't. The next morning, I drove to Clayton's house, an old run-down two-story frame structure hidden in some trees off a little dirt road north of Denison. Clayton was waiting for me outside as I drove up.
We can't have breakfast here this morning. Arnold called and wants to see you first thing. Follow me in the truck.
Elizabeth must have said something to Arnold. The captain would be really furious with me if I got fired the second day. I had no information that could help him. When we got to Arnold's building, Clayton sent me down the hall on my own.
I'll get the truck ready while you see what Dung Beetle wants.
How would I respond if he accused me of trying to steal his girl? I knocked lightly on the door.
Come.
He was in the same outfit as the day before, sitting, reading a pest control magazine with his feet propped up on his desk. He put the magazine down this time.
Sit down. My girlfriend Elizabeth, she tells me she knows you.
I couldn't show emotion. Yes, I met her a few months ago out at the fort. He smiled and seemed more interested.
What do you know about her?
Honestly, not much.
She is fine. But getting in her petties is like trying to get into Fort Knox. You know what I mean?
No, not really.
Oh, come on. You didn't once think about having your way with that woman?
I didn't answer. He stopped suddenly and frowned.
You're not queer, are you? 'Cause I don't employ queers.
No, sir. I thought she was very attractive. We just never really dated. He shook his head.
I'm pretty good with women. I can show you scratches on my back, but I haven't been able to crack the code to her chastity belt. I thought maybe you'd done it with her.
No. My mental image of my fist readjusting his nose was overwhelming. He should have a license to be that despicable.
Well, I nail 'em all eventually.
Then he changed his mood in an instant.
So what the hell are you doing still sitting there? Get to work!
I said nothing as I left. I considered boring a hole in his head and letting the sap run out. I was really hoping he was involved in this event thing. It would be satisfying to add handcuffs to his jewelry collection. The other two employees, Eduardo and Arturo, were in the front getting their gear together. They looked as if they could have been brothers. Eduardo stood about 6'2", with dark features, a mustache, and long sideburns. He spit tobacco a lot, but never smiled. Arturo was shorter than the other man, but he had the same features and hair color, right down to the mustache and long sideburns. They spoke to each other in Spanish. When they did speak English, it was hard to understand them. As I passed them, I asked Clayton if I could follow him in my car today.
Okay, don't guess that would hurt anything.
After we were outside, I told him I wanted to double back and watch Arnold. He understood. He had a job north of Sherman that would take all day. 20 minutes later, I had worked my way back to a position in a little park across the street, hidden, but with a good view of the Arnold building. Eduardo and Arturo each had an Arnold truck, driving away about the same time. An hour passed. I wondered if I was wasting my time. Then I saw Arnold exit the building and jump into his Corvette. I followed at a safe distance. He drove for about 20 minutes across town to a nice rural home. Being Texas, it was flat, so I couldn't get close. I parked the car and hiked to a higher point behind some trees to get a better look at the house. It was 2-story brick and looked to be new construction. As I got closer, I could see into the backyard. There was a swimming pool, some lawn chairs, and a table. Finally, when I got into a position to see better, I made out 2 people in the pool. It was Arnold and an attractive woman. They were naked and they were doing what he told me he wanted to do to Elizabeth. They did it for 2 hours. They stopped finally and went inside, I guess for lunch. After about 30 minutes, he was at her door, kissing her goodbye. I ran to get back to my car. He drove back to his office, staying there maybe 30 minutes. Then he was off again, this time to Denison, just north of Sherman. At the door of a small, modern apartment complex, a beautiful Latino woman in a bikini ran down the steps from the 2nd floor with towels and a small bag, jumping in his car and kissing him. He peeled away in the Corvette, like a shorter, uglier version of Magnum P.I. He ended up at a beach house off of Lake Texoma. They spent the rest of the afternoon there. I couldn't get very close, but I knew he was probably doing more of what he told me he wanted to do to Elizabeth. I called Captain Avigdor from a payphone with my first report.
So he's just a horny sleaze? That gets us nowhere. Tomorrow, follow the other 2 employees. See where they go. We're in an awkward position here, Coit. I can't help you. We don't even know who the bad guys are. And if we send anybody else in, they may get suspicious, whoever they are. Try talking to Clayton again. Maybe there's something you can get him to remember, a little nugget that could put us on the right track.
I met up with Clayton at Arnold's. How about after work, I fix you some of that Colombian coffee I found? Clayton smiled.
Breakfast for dinner. I'll rustle up the bacon and eggs I was going to cook this morning.
Clayton's kitchen was functional, old, and dirty. I put a bag of Colombian Java next to the rusty pot that probably filtered the coffee with its own unique flavor. Ugly warped paneling met peeling ceiling paint in a musty room, furnished only with a couple of mangy couches. These relics, covered with old cloth that resembled the hair of someone's shedding pets, provided a resting place for the old man's clothing. Clayton came from the back in a t-shirt, tossing his dirty work shirt onto the pile of clothes on the couch.
The place ain't much, but tonight it's home. How do you like your eggs?
Over easy. I can fix the bacon. He handed me a pan.
You're kind of young.
What kind of a dig was this?
To be doing what you're doing. Law enforcement.
Yeah, but you do what you have to do. Looks like you're a bachelor. Were you ever married?
Yep, she left me. I don't blame her. I made a lot of mistakes, kid. I took her for granted. We had a son, and I was too busy living my own life to raise him right. Busy trying to make money the easy way. Busy with poker nights. Busy with a bunch of crap that really didn't matter. The kid left as soon as he got old enough to get away. We never had much money. Nothing seemed to work. I started drinking some. She put up with way more than she should have. At this age, I ought to own that pest control company. Instead, I have to take orders from Dung Beetle.
There was an incredible sadness about the man, but there's something encouraging about the smell of home-cooked bacon and eggs. As Clayton handed me my plate, I was about to take my first bite when he stopped me.
We ain't heathens. Need to say thank you to the man upstairs. Bow your head.
I bowed, fascinated to hear what this man's prayer might sound like.
Lord, we ain't got no business even daring to speak to you excepting for Jesus. I'm grateful for this young man you sent here, and I'm asking you to protect him. You feed us, you clothe us, and give us work, all things we don't deserve. A man never knows how long he's got in this world, and that goes for us too. So we're going to enjoy this meal, even if it's our very last one, because we know you said it. We're giving you and Christ all the glory. Amen.
Then he looked straight at me, more like straight through me.
Make the most of your opportunities, kid. Life flies by really fast.
Breakfast for dinner. There was something about those old iron pans that made eggs and bacon true gourmet dining. The Colombian coffee was far better than the swill you'd get at the local Choke and Pukes. I almost forgot it was time to do my job again. Clayton, can you think of anything else about Arnold that might give us a clue about this? Who are his friends? What does he do in his spare time? The old man smiled.
You followed the Dung Beetle. You know what he does in his spare time.
It was odd. Dusk seemed to be early tonight. The sun creeping in through the window had a reddish tone to it as it played across his face.
He's definitely in on it, but he's so stupid he doesn't have a clue of what he's into.
Now, his face changed. He looked right into my eyes.
You know he's going to test you, don't you? You know he's going to try and see what you're made of. He's been chasing you for a long time.
What? Who are you talking about? Arnold?
Arnold's an idiot. It's him. He wants to destroy you.
Where was this coming from? I was yelling, but now my own voice was in slow motion.
Who? Who are you talking about? Lee Dunham.
The old man's words drifted away as his face went from purple to black. His eyes rolled back in his head. His body slumped off of the chair, but instead of falling into the floor, it started to float. I glanced down at my plate. The 2 eggs he had fixed for me now appeared as yellow eyes with pupils, looking up at me. They blinked. I jumped up out of the chair. The room was all purple. It was hard to walk. I was stumbling toward the door to try to get outside, into the light. There was a figure there, standing in the door. It took a moment, but I recognized him. The Cherokee warrior.
You must come, right now, Lee. Your destiny awaits.
That concludes Chapter 16. We invite you next to read the PDF or listen to Chapter 17, entitled, Why is the Question? We also invite you to listen to our podcast for Chapter 16, in which Michele Jaco talks with Jeff Neal about the story, the characters, and the symbolic elements within the chapter. Music for this production was licensed from the Smart Sum collection, and cover art was created from Adobe stock images. Some voice work was enhanced by AI technology from 11